services, first reading bills. Now if you get that, then you say government business review, and then you last.
So commit, you would say commit, okay.
You commit, then we go back to standing committee.
Okay.
Let's get this into
Government business.
and go back to the business. And then we go
Okay. Good morning, members. We would like to remind you that we have to maintain a quorum always on the floor. Government business. The session is now resumed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, papers recommitted.
Honorable member for City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to give notice of the Transport Authority Validation Bill 2020. I'm commanded to lay the Transport Authority Validation Bill 2020.
Take it easy. Member for the City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am commanded to lay the Public Service General Amendment Order 2020, the signed loan contract.
Take it easy. Member for St. Michael South Central.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am commanded to lay the signed loan contract number 4920/OCBA, Public Sector Modernization Program, and the signed loan contract number 4865/OCBA, the Sustainable Energy Investment Program 2.
As you wish. Member for the City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am commanded to lay the audited financial statements of the Board of Management of Leicester Vaughan School for the financial year ended March 31st, 2012.
As you wish. Member for Christchurch West.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the Transport Authority Fares and Tolls Regulations 2020.
Mr. Speaker, government notices recommitted.
Government notices.
Give notice of the bill.
Member for the City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the Transport Authority Validation Bill 2020 be read the first time.
Beg second.
Give notice first.
Question is, can we have, okay, let's give notice first of the bill and then ask for read a second time.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to give notice of the Transport Authority Validation Bill 2020.
Yeah.
First reading of bills recommitted.
First reading.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the Transport Authority Validation Bill 2020 be read the first time.
Beg second.
Question is that the bill be read the first time. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Government business resumed.
When the session was taken, we were on Standing Finance Committee, and to that we returned.
The Standing Finance Committee resumes with Head 36. We invite the Minister and his team into the well. We continue with question or comment from the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Pleasant good morning once again, and thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I would also like to add to your response about being carbon neutral that the planting of 1 million trees will certainly help in this exercise. And to that, we are eternally grateful for the vision of our Prime Minister. But, Minister, I want to echo the sentiments of every single person living in Christchurch. When I tell you that what you have done in terms of removing sewage from the streets on the South Coast is nothing for us short of miraculous. And I want to echo the appreciation and thanks from every single person living in Christchurch and beyond these shores, because you have done something which seek to threaten the health of this nation, the touristic product that we are so fond of. And unfortunately, there was a miasma that seek to undermine life as we know it in Christchurch. I want to ask you, can you further expound on the plans to have a tertiary facility, sewage facility in that vicinity? Or what is the immediate plans or challenges that you face in the South Coast? And secondly, well, I'll answer that question first and then come back with a follow-up.
Dr. Seeley?
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, honourable members. Honourable member, thank you for the question. The government's intention, this ministry's intention, is to upgrade the South Coast sewage treatment plant as quickly as possible. That plant generates about 9,000 cubic meters per day of wastewater. That's equivalent to around 2.5 million gallons a day. It is our intention to treat that water to drinking water standard or almost drinking water standard. And then is our intention to either recharge aquifers or to irrigate crops as well in that region. We will then move immediately to upgrade the Bridgetown plant, which is already a secondary plant, and we will upgrade that plant to tertiary, which is almost drinking water or drinking water standard. And we will use that water as well for also groundwater recharge and or irrigation of crops.
Minister, before you continue, this has been a very ticklish subject for us since we broached it first approximately 2 years ago. Barbadians, for the most part, have a difficulty with the concept of reusing water for domestic purposes. They can't seem to wrap their minds around it. But I think in some measure that is because we don't appreciate the extent to which this is done worldwide. We in Barbados will not be reinventing the wheel where this is concerned. It is important because of our water scarcity, that we don't waste a drop of water. Every single drop that can be reused or saved, we need to reuse it or save it. Now, most Barbadians start traveling by going to Miami, Caribbean and then to Miami. The first stop for Barbadian outside the Caribbean is usually Miami. When you turn on that tap and you drink water from it in Miami, whether you're in a hotel, whether you're in a private home, most of that water is recycled water from sewage. When you go to New York, London, Germany, all of those countries, Israel reuses every single drop. Everything that comes out of their sewage plant is reused, whether for drinking water, for fertilizer, for the generation of energy. So I know that we as a people have a difficulty with the concept of reusing wastewater. But let me put it a bit closer to home. Let me not point at foreign countries and foreign cities and foreign practices. In the height of our drought, the bulk of the aquifer recharge comes from what we flush down the toilet. So we flush or we use water domestically in our houses, in our business. It goes into a well. That water is then out of that well, filtered through the land, into the aquifer. The Barbados Water Authority pulls that, chlorinates it, and we reuse it. So already, a vast percentage of our aquifer recharge comes from water that we are reusing. So I think once people get to understand that we're actually doing nothing new, and when we treat the water and we recharge the aquifers with it, effectively, what we are putting to soak through the land is way cleaner than what we are putting to soak through the land now. So we're going to have to embark upon a massive public education program. We're going to have to desensitize Barbadians to some of the concepts that they hold as the Holy Grail, or some of our natural biases. But the reality is we are going to have to get to that point. For us to use the water for aquifer recharge is just cosmetics. That's to appease a social conscience. The reality is, if we treat it to full tertiary potable drinking water, then it is actually cleaner than what we pull out of the aquifer now. So we as a government need to have a conversation with the people of Barbados to let us decide on what is palatable, no pun intended, for Barbadians, and decide the best way forward while saving money.
And what are the contingency plans in place to prevent the last episode that took place where sewage was running freely on the streets?
Thank you, Honourable Member. We have two temporary outfall pipes in place right now, an 8-inch line and a 12-inch line. So there is some redundancy there within the temporary outfall. So that temporary outfall is vulnerable to very high sea swells because it's above the seabed and it's anchored. So anything above 2.5, 3 meters of sea swells, we get nervous about losing that temporary outfall. We do have injection wells on the site that can act as a contingency if we can get the grease out of the sewage, and I would urge through this medium all of the customers on the South Coast who are connected to the South Coast Sewage Project to please remove your grease before you discharge to the sewer. It is causing us a heap of problems. And then the next contingency that we're discussing right now is exactly that, to put a grease removal system at the South Coast as a matter of priority in the event that we have to use those injection wells.
Minister, just to put it in context for you, we've never, since constructing the temporary outfall, had a situation where the volume of effluent was sufficient to require the use of both outfalls at the same time. And we alternate between the outfalls for maintenance purposes. And even the smaller outfall has been adequately handling the entire waste stream from the South Coast sewage network at present. But we decided to go that route instead of building one larger outfall, because the nature of a temporary outfall is that you don't have all the engineering in place that would secure it for 50 years. It's not expected to last 50 years, which is, if we put in a permanent outfall, we'd expect a lifespan of at least 50 years. So by having both the 8 and the 12, I would say it is less likely that both pipes will be damaged at the exact same time from something other than a catastrophic weather event. So even when constructed, we built that redundancy in place that if something happened to one, we could utilize the next one while repairing the one that was damaged. So a lot of thought went in to exactly what to put in place to ensure that what we met when coming into office does not happen again, not under our watch.
Thank you, Minister. Water is seen as a basic commodity all over the world. And I believe that what you have brought to this ministry is a basic needs approach. I know you're a very modest individual, and I want to tell the country for you and to express the thanks, the heartfelt thanks of not only my constituents, but everywhere around Barbados, when for the first time in the history of this country, ordinary Barbadians can now access water without having land ownership. Minister, I want to thank you for this decision that you have made in your ministry. It has allowed my constituents, certainly constituents across Barbados, to be able to access that basic need, that necessity, in order to survive. And they don't have to own land now. Can you please expose a little more on this and take us through the process, how persons can now access water if they don't have land? Thank you. Thank you, Minister.
All human beings have a right, certain basic requirements, certain basic rights. We have a universal right of access to water, potable drinking water. It is perhaps one of the most fundamental accesses that you can have. There are many things we can do without. The deprivation of water will probably kill you faster than anything else other than deprivation of oxygen. So water is that fundamental right. There's been a practice in Barbados from time immemorial where, and it's across the common law countries, where water attaches a charge to land. So if you ran up a water bill, your water bill doesn't necessarily just attach to you personally. If you ran up a water bill and you were the owner of land and then you sold that land and moved on, the utility doesn't have to come behind you. The utility comes behind the owner of that land. So the owner of that land would not be able to connect water for themselves, the new owner, until the old bill had been cleared off. So, and water is one of those rates for which your land can be sold to pay the bill. So if you run up a water bill and you're unable to pay your water bill, your land can actually be sold to pay the water bill. So because of that, it was deemed in the best interest of all, and it was the law, that a person cannot connect such a utility that has the ability to bind land without the permission or the consent of the owner of the land, because it, technically speaking, under that regime would not be fair if, for example, I was squatting. Let's just use that example. And I connected water to the land of the owner, and they did not know, ran up a bill, and then they're stuck with the bill when I moved away. We had to balance that legal construct, and it makes sense. We had to balance that legal requirement, logical legal requirement, over our commitment to the rights of the individual under various conventions, international conventions. So the ministry and the government thought it appropriate that we relax the legal implications of the water bill on the land to allow people access to water. It makes sense. Deprivation of water is not just depriving you of water. It brings into play public health concerns. What happens in the event of an outbreak? If there's a fire? All those things have to come into play. So we implemented a policy where persons who do not hold title to land can still get a water supply connected for their use. I use the example of squatters just now to prove a point, but it is more than that. We have a lot of situations in Barbados where somebody's grandmother was the owner of the land, and the grandmother died, the estate has not been settled, nobody has been appointed an executor or an administrator, the family wants to use the land but can't get a water connection because there's nobody to sign on behalf of the deceased. And it then filters down, and the longer it goes, the more difficult it gets to resolve it, because you have to resolve all of the estates in priority in order to sort out the one at the bottom. So it was just too difficult, and it was affecting a number of people. I was getting complaints every single day from assorted MPs, many of whom are in here. I think there are probably only 2 MPs that did not call me in relation to this issue. So we decided, got together with the Water Authority, we tried to find a logistical way to deal with it, and we came up with a solution. The solution is, if you want to have a water connection on your land, you have to pay the deposit for the connection, but you also have to pay effectively a security deposit. So you have to pay in advance for a certain amount of prospective water consumption. You are not going to be allowed to exceed that deposit, because if you exceed that deposit, then it attaches to the land. So the Water Authority has to be vigilant in making sure that people don't run up arrears past the deposit. The other thing that the Water Authority had to do in the event, I mean, it's a statutory corporation, we are not as efficient as we would like to be in certain areas, and we're working on them. But if for the Water Authority's side, they fail to catch it before it exceeded the deposit, then the Water Authority is going to indemnify the owner of the land, the actual title holder, against those arrears. So it was a serious balancing act. For anybody who wants to avail themselves of this water service, you just have to go to the Water Authority, make the application, they will come and inspect. Once you, but there's one caveat, it does not apply to prohibited development areas. So if you're in a Zone 1 area where there's more of a reason other than the ownership of the land or the liability with respect to the land that's in play, so public health concerns outweigh everything else. If you're in an area where you're close to the aquifer and connecting you to the water supply is prohibited, even if you own the land, then we're not going to do it, obviously, if you don't own the land. So you just go and apply. Once you are in a area where development is allowed, then you fill out the form, you sign the indemnity, you pay your deposit, you pay your security deposit, and we will connect you. Why we have not publicized this is perhaps the single most important thing I believe that I've done since becoming a minister. We took a low-key approach to it for sensitivity reasons. There are people in Barbados that have water challenges because of their geographical location. We know of the issues with St. Joseph and the parishes in the higher elevation. And I wish, on behalf of the Water Authority and all concerned, to actually apologize to the minister, to the MP for St. Joseph, who has gotten it rough. He shared many, every single day without fail. He sends on the complaints of his constituents to me. So I do not envy him having to apologize on my behalf. But what I will say is that we're actively working on it. But we had to balance the reality of his constituents with saying that we're now changing a law to add more people onto the water service. So we kept that one quite low-key, so as not to rub it in the face of people who are actually suffering current water outages or water shortages. But it is important that people actually know it now, because it is not good enough that people still continue to be deprived of water or access to water for all of the reasons I outlined, when there is now a solution to allow you to connect to the Water Authority where you didn't have it before. So the ministry, the Water Authority, we are actually quite proud of this one, because we've taken a significant step to break those colonial shackles and those laws that bound us and we inherited from Britain in the interests of the safety, security, and proper access to water of our citizens. Thank you.
So just want to be perfectly clear, that includes squatters?
We make no distinction. The only distinction between a landowner and somebody who cannot prove title or doesn't have the consent of the landowner is that you have to pay a deposit against your water bill. That is the only distinguishing characteristic. We're not asking if you're squatting. Can you provide a title deed or consent from the owner? No. You need to pay this and this. If you're not in a a prohibited area, we will connect you. So, madam, the legal aspects of squatting are delicate. If you have squatters on your premises, it is incumbent upon you to get them off.
But that's not as always as easy as it sounds.
No, it is not as easy as it sounds. I accept that. But if people are living on the land and have been there in many instances for 10, 15, 20 years, we could not, with a clear conscience, weighing everything else, continue to deprive you of access to water. And the other thing is the indemnity that you have to sign acknowledges that your connection to the water service cannot be used as evidence of your title to the land. So we're not giving the person a right, or we will not allow them to use that connection for establishing that they have a right to title to the land. It is simply because if we don't do it, we're dancing on the edge of a pin. If we don't do it, and we have an outbreak in Barbados of something, Father forbid, then we have serious issues. And to be honest, when we were battling with the sewage issue, and we were hoping to get through and get the sewage off the street and to get it cleaned up and doing the disinfection, we were very, very worried of the possibility of an outbreak of a sewage-borne or water-borne illness, and then how that has the potential to spread quickly, where you have pockets of people who have no access to water and basic hygiene. So what catalyzed our decision to do that, in addition to the altruistic intentions, was practical concerns informed by the crisis that we're having on the South Coast and our need to actually provide access to water in keeping with our treaty obligations.
Okay. Carrying over from yesterday, I invite the honorable member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit to the question of natural heritage conservation. The Graham Hall swamp obviously would have been impacted as part of the collateral damage during the free flow of effluent along the South Coast and in the neighboring vicinities of where we are right now. I should take the opportunity to say that as Minister of Tourism, there are a few people who have expressed an interest in making investment of one form or another because they recognize, and properly so, that ecological and environmental attractions lend themselves naturally to being touristic in nature. And people want to make the type of investment that I think the country should be urged to welcome in areas like the Graham Hall swamp. Obviously, as I say so, my mind takes me to the other point that I think should be made from this place as soon as possible, which is that while we would want to welcome investors, there have to be investors who are prepared to respect Barbadian people and not mistreat our people in the land of their birth. And that is a matter about which I think we have to be abundantly clear. But more to the point, to make an investment of that type possible, I think what the country would want to hear is whether the ministry has plans, either by itself or in association with any other entities, to rehabilitate the swamp, flush it, and make it more fit for purpose as a unique environmental and ecological site in this country.
Honourable Member, thank you for the question. That cuts across two ministries. It cuts across the Water Authority and it cuts across the Ministry of the Environment. But as I am here, I will try my best to cover both aspects of it. One of our ultimate and driving concerns for the speed at which we resolve the South Coast issues was the need to protect the swamp. The swamp is a Ramsar site. It's the largest natural wetlands in Barbados. It is a protected area, and it is, as the Honourable Member said, an ecological and heritage treasure. When the initial plant was designed, the plant was designed to take the sewage into the plant and then expel the sewage out to sea off Needham's Point, effectively running the entire way down Highway 7 from Graham Hall till about a mile off of the Hilton Hotel. Now, if there was an issue with the plant, the capacity was there to bypass the plant and flush the untreated or unstrained effluent straight out to sea. That was the fail-safe. The problem came in when the fail-safe itself failed. And that was the primary method of disposal as well. So there was nowhere, literally, to put the sewage other than in the swamp. We came in and found the sewage going into the swamp. And it was going in by design, so it was being pumped in from the sewage plant, and it was also going in by function, because as the sewage flooded, the South Coast drains in such a way that when you have rainfall, a lot of it drains into the swamp, and that allows the swamp to maintain its levels. So that is if rain is falling and draining. But if sewage is coming up in the same area that rain goes, then the sewage itself was draining directly into the swamp. So even where they were trying to push some down the outflow pipe, you still had a situation where it was bubbling up through the road and finding its way back into the swamp. So one of the first things we did is said, look, we need to accept that the swamp is now polluted. We need to put a plan in place to how to remedy the swamp when we finish. But for now, in order to properly investigate the pipes, we need the sewage off the street. So we abandoned entirely and directed everything into the swamp to allow us to now have access to the pipe work, the outfall, and the inflow pipes to investigate what the source of the problem really was and to try to fix them. So that is what gave us the breathing space to actually get the fix done. Once we'd achieved the fix and we set up the temporary outfall off Graham Hall, not a drop of sewage has gone into the swamp. We have dredged the swamp, expedited the flushing of the swamp through the sluice gate. Fortunately, we had some significant rains last year that assisted in flushing of the swamp. They cleared out a lot of the waterways to allow the sewage to go, and then the solids in the swamp biodegrade. Solid, I don't know how detailed I'm supposed to get, but solid organic matter breaks down. So it may be feces today, in 2 months, it's soil. So through the natural process, a lot of it, the swamp remediated itself. The other issue is that the engineering advice we got, and even the persons who were in control of the swamp, said we need to not over-engineer the solution. We need to stop the pollution, create the ways for water to move in the swamp, and then allow the swamp to fix itself. What you would have noticed is that at the height of the pollution, there were no birds in the swamp. The monkeys had disappeared entirely from the swamp, and there were no fish at all in the swamp. We cut a number of flow channels to allow the sewage to a longer passage in the sunlight, because the sunlight also helps to break down, to biodegrade the sewage. So we engineered some of it, and then we left nature to do the rest. I'm happy to report to the honorable member that if he was to go and visit Graham Hall Swamp now, it looks even better than it did before. You're seeing plenty big fish. We actually are trying to prevent people from fishing in the swamp, right? The monkeys are back, the birds are back, the life is back. I would hazard a bet that the swamp is in as good as, if not a better condition than when we had the issue, because of the additional works that we did to facilitate its remediation and recovery. Sorry, I just want at this stage to say, this sounds like if this was entirely the Ministry of Energy and Water that did this. We had tremendous help and assistance from the Minister and the Ministry of Health, who worked with us every step of the way, and also the Minister and the Ministry of Environment. This was one time when there was no distinction between the ministries. I was allowed to call and deploy the resources of health as were necessary, and the resources of the Ministry of the Environment. So it was an entirely cooperative effort, and it shows exactly what can happen when we acknowledge that we are one government and we work together in pursuit of the same goal.
Thank you. Honorable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to thank the Minister and his team for providing good leadership over the past almost 2 years. I must say that for the very first time in my political career, I have been able to witness that the Barbados Water Authority has a heart in that they are going out of their way to give credit to a number of persons who are in default, and they're willing to go the extra mile to ensure that persons have access to water. So I want to thank the Minister, too, for that, and of course the Chairman and the Board of the Barbados Water Authority for doing a good job. I think the new management of the Barbados Water Authority must be congratulated, too, for helping the cause and to doing the things that are needed. Now, I heard the Minister talk about the right to water. Water is essential and a basic right, which we know, for all mankind. And there was a time when we used to boast that we had almost 90% of most of our homes in Barbados attached to water. I heard the Minister talk about a new program which will encourage people to hook up to the system without the land, without clearing the land. I am willing to give it a try, but I see a situation where it will also encourage wholesale squatting, that squatters will now have rights. And of course, we need to ask the learned gentleman if we are going to do similar to what Trinidad has done, where you have squatters' rights. But I believe the Minister is a young person, and I'm not sure if he's aware of the standpipe days. There's something called a standpipe, and really, I do not know if we have how many standpipes we have today. But standpipes has been used as part of our cultural experience, have been part of the standpipe, where people use the standpipe for those persons who did not have connections to water. I want to find out from the Minister if he's aware of how many standpipes. In my constituency, for example, we have about 4 of them. They're not properly maintained. I want to find out if the Minister knows how many standpipes there are available in rural Barbados and in the city. Why are they not maintained? And if they're not maintained, what plans she has to maintain the standpipes, to ensure, first of all, that they do not waste water, because I have called the Barbados Water Authority, and this is one of the things that I have noticed over the years. People say to me that the only way to get a response, some people, not my thing, Mr. Minister, that if they call the calling program, they get some form of hearing. But the Barbados Water Authority need to set up a system where if someone calls and said a pipe is burst and it is running, the standpipe that in my district was running for 2 or 3 days, what happened? So I want to find out, my first question then to you is, what plans do you have to maintain the few standpipes you have? Because I don't think many people use the standpipe, but they're still important. The standpipe is still an important aspect. And persons who do not have access to water must use the standpipe, but they need to be controlled. I remember last year I asked the question, what educational program are you giving out to schools to ensure that people, young children, don't misuse the water? There are certain, in private capacity, there are people who have on the faucets that goes off after 2 or 3 seconds. But whereas in the standpipe, they're not maintained and they can run for a whole day. So I want to find out from you, Minister, how many standpipes we have, Are they being maintained, and why not if they're not? Thank you.
Honorable Member, I thank you for that very detailed question. I can tell you that we have more than 500 standpipes in Barbados still.
More than 5?
More than 500.
500 standpipes.
Before I actually turn the aspect over to Mr. Charles Leslie to deal with the maintenance, etc., I just want to correct a couple of things that that informed your initial intervention. Water, as of the 28th of July 2010, is accepted as one of the basic human rights under the UN Convention. So globally in the world, this is not just Barbados, water is a basic human right that people can actually sue for and are entitled to get.
Right.
Now, having said that, you asked the question as to, is our new policy going to encourage squatting and squatters' rights? Right now, anybody that is squatting on land that does not belong to them and has been there for more than 10 years and treating it as theirs, user as of right, is entitled to apply to the court to get a title deed for the same land. So if you've been squatting for more than 10 years and the owner of the land has done nothing to remove you, then you are entitled to sue for title to that land. That exists now under the laws of Barbados. We're not giving anybody any new right.
In fact, the owner's title is extinguished under the Limitation Act.
Correct. So what I would like people to understand is that the owners of land cannot purchase land and put it down. You have to monitor and take care of your land. You have to assert your rights to prevent somebody else from getting entitled to it. I was very clear that one of the things that has to be signed is an indemnity which says that the connection of the water supply cannot be used as evidence. Sorry. It cannot be used as evidence supporting your claim for title to the land. So us connecting you does not advance your cause or your ability as a squatter any further. If we're even talking about standpipes, and this is something we considered as well because it was raised before, is there a difference if I put a standpipe in your district where you don't have water and you can still draw water from the standpipe and transport it to your home? And we're still facilitating you in your occupation of the land. So I hear what you're saying, and it was a common concern of people. But as I said, what informed us expediting this process was the need to protect Barbadians to deal with a real situation that we had to prevent the possibility of a public health issue or an outbreak in Barbados. And I believe that we have made the right decision. There will be people who have an issue with it. There will be people who support it. But I believe we have made the right decision in this respect. The last thing I want to say before I turn over to Mr. Leslie is Barbadians need to be more responsible. I agree with you in how they use standpipes. We had an issue up to last week where someone in Christchurch had connected, rigged up a hose to the standpipe and were building their house using the government's water. Right? They did not spend a cent. They didn't apply for connection, nothing. They were using all of the government's water in the construction of their wall house. And we tend to not take standpipes seriously. People turn on the standpipe and leave it running. So we do need to monitor the way we use standpipes and respect the fact that it is a service that is provided, that is not provided in many other areas in the world. And the Barbados Water Authority actually does not have an obligation to continue with its standpipe program. We have to provide water for community tanks for areas that don't have water. Because if we can't get the piped water to you, we have to allow you, put provisions in place that you can access water. But where water is running in an area, then we don't have an obligation to provide standpipes. The need for the standpipe and what informed the proliferation of standpipes in Barbados has long since passed. So I'm going to turn the rest of that question over to Ms. Leslie.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for the question. as our minister indicated, we have over 500 standpipes on the island. The Barbados Water Authority is currently doing an inventory of those standpipes across the island because, as the Member of Parliament correctly indicated, some of them are currently being abused. And we know that basically the water that is used at the standpipe, we still have to account for in our non-revenue water calculation, is water that we are producing but not getting revenue for. In that respect, we are metering the standpipes right across the island, and we're actually doing what we call georeferencing of those standpipes. So we know exactly where they are in our network. And those that are abused, based on reports that we're getting from the public, what we are doing is, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Health would do their surveys to see if all of the persons within the areas have pipe-borne water. If that is the case, well, then we work with the Ministry of Health and remove those standpipes in those areas where they're no longer needed. But the ones where, in the areas where the standpipes are needed, we are doing an inventory of them. We are working on a program now to maintain those standpipes so that we have a better understanding of the water that's used at those standpipes in those locations. In our network, approximately 98% of our population gets water pipe-borne into their houses, and the remainder of them would get from the standpipes or from the community tanks that we have located in those areas. So in terms of the abuse, we are working on the abuse by metering those standpipes so that we know how much is used. We are currently also, if there is need for the standpipe in the area but it's still being abused, we are also removing what we call the garden hose bib taps to prevent people from coming and connecting garden hoses to them, and putting on a special piece so it is more difficult to do that connection. So we are looking at those standpipes in their entirety to try to still provide the service but still minimize the abuse that we can get from those standpipes.
Thank you. I still believe that even though you have 98% of Barbadians have water into their homes, that 2% of the population can be a large chunk. And I would suggest that we maintain some standpipes in some strategic area, because I remember last year, I live in the workman's area, St. George. And when the pipe went off, I had to run to Newbury standpipe to get water. I almost bathed there too, because me as a child, we used to bathe at the standpipe.
I have reports that you did bathe there.
The standpipe has cultural memories for me and for most of us who live in the country area. And I'm sure you're aware that, the standpipe days may not necessarily be too far away. So I would advise you to maintain some, because I'm aware in my constituency there are a few people who cannot even pay, even though you said, I listened to you very carefully, you said that Barbados has the best water and it may be less costly. Which is, I agree, because the only country outside of Barbados that may be cheaper than Barbados may be Trinidad. But there are still a few people who cannot pay for water. There's still a few of our people who come to me and ask me to help them, even though I may be struggling as well. So MPs have to help pull the weight, because sometimes they go to the welfare department and they're not treated very kindly, and that is another program in itself. What do you do for those persons who cannot pay? I mean, if your policy is to ensure that 100% of people get water, would you liaise with the welfare department for these people? Because some of them cannot help themselves. What happens to this group of people who do not have access, who cannot go to the welfare and say, I want water, even though they need water? And your policy is not to deny anybody from water because it's against the human rights. So if it's against the human rights, why are you cutting off anybody water for in any case? The state should be paying for that if they cannot pay. So therefore, you may need to carry out a means assessment. For persons who cannot pay, the state should pay for them based on your own principle that nobody should be denied access to water. What happens in a case like this, sir?
Honorable member, I am glad you raised that point. I hope the Minister of Finance is listening, because that's a decision for him, mercifully, and not me. Well, her. But one thing I will tell you is, and I don't want, I'm
You understand, go ahead.
No, I was thinking at the time of
But the
Minister
question
Strawn.
was, the question is the Googlese, so don't you...
Yeah, no problem.
you know.
So I will say to you, I don't want to publicize it, because publicizing often leads to abuse.
Yeah.
But as most of you in here are aware, when you've had somebody in your constituency who is below the poverty line or in need or literally unable to pay their water, and the water has been disconnected, a simple phone call and an explanation of the circumstances and proof of the circumstances has had that water turned back on. So I, as a minister, have taken the decision to work with the Board of the Water Authority that nobody who is vulnerable and unable to pay their water bill should be disconnected. It's not the ideal situation, because we do need the money, right? I do direct them to welfare. I do make the phone call and ask if welfare can take some of that off the bill. But we will not disconnect somebody who is known and proven to be vulnerable. Having said that, when you don't pay your electricity bill, your electricity gets disconnected. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, no amount of begging.
That's not basic human right.
I understand that. I understand that, and which is why we take a different approach. Yeah. But I'm saying there are some people who don't fall into that most vulnerable category, who prioritize their water bill all the way down, only deal with it when it gets the red letter saying due for disconnection, and will pay their cell phone bill before they pay the water bill. Somebody said to me, Mr. Abrams, after I've paid all my bills, hear what I'm saying? Yeah. After I have paid all my bills, I don't have enough left to pay water. Well, water should be one of the first.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're balancing a culture, because there's a lot of lag time between the beginning of the arrears and the actual disconnection. So people tend to tread in that grace period and maximize that grace period, only activating themselves when the disconnection happens. So we will make provision for those who are vulnerable and unable to pay. And it's for the MPs to actually represent properly and faithfully who those people are. But we're not tolerating those who are just being worthless.
Right. Agreed. And I think a means test should be carried out for this type of persons. But I want to remind you too that in some developed societies, for example, in Toronto, during the winter you cannot turn off a person's heat. It's a gas. You cannot, that's a human right. You cannot turn off heat. You cannot. The state will not allow you. The state provide for that. Anyway, I thought that you have answered most of the questions rightly. My last question has to do with the drilling of oil. Some years ago, we were able to give out a number of tenders. Where are we on the tender process for oil? Because even though I know the government and the world has gone to climate change and so on, and we are now against fossil fuel, and we are into this normal thing. Where are we? Are we, and I understand that our neighbor, Guyana, is set to make a windfall. Are we part of that? Do we want to get into this windfall? Because even though I agree that fossil fuel may be a thing of the past, we, as a third world country, must still maintain at least some percentage of it. And if we have wells, where are we on this here?
Right. Let me just start by saying our government's policy with respect to 100% renewable energy, renewable sources for the generation of energy in Barbados is an on-land policy. And what does that mean, and why have we done it? We need to do our part to fight climate change. Having said that, the reality is fossil fuel use is not going to disappear within the next 50 years. It's not going to do it. There's some processes that are probably most efficiently done if fossil fuels are used. So what we are promoting is the use of fossil fuels in a sustainable way, in a way that prolongs the resources of the fossil fuels that actually currently exist in the world. Because oil, for example, when a leaf or branch falls and it starts the process to become oil, that is hundreds of millions of years before it becomes oil. So if we continue at this pace, we will drain all of the hydrocarbon resources from the planet before we can actually put back a drop of oil or a piece of coal or anything like that. So what we are advocating is a sustainable method of using the fossil fuel resources. We believe that we can proceed in Barbados using only renewable sources. There are some places that can't do it. But we also believe that where those places can employ renewable sources, they should do it and leave the fossil fuel consumption only where, for circumstances where only fossil fuel consumption will do, right? So having said that, I'm going to ask Mr. Jamar White to explain exactly where we are with our hydrocarbon exploration and the ministry and government's plans.
Madam Chair, honorable members, thank you for your question. To sum it up in a comprehensive way, in addition to what the minister said in relation to our policy in relation to the offshore, we recognize that renewable energy is very important, energy efficiency is very important for our country to save foreign exchange, the impact on the environment. However, we do believe that we have significant offshore oil and gas potential as well, with technological improvements in the way companies search for oil, in the way they produce that oil, in the way they process that oil, also in advancements in technology in terms of carbon sequestration and the use of cleaner fuels, for example, natural gas. We believe that we can utilize those offshore oil and gas resources in a much more sustainable manner. As you indicated, our neighbors are doing very well in relation to the offshore. Guyana, I think everybody is very well aware of the successes in Guyana. They have been a trailblazer in the industry in terms of the time period between finding the oil and actually producing it. They started producing last year. In addition to Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada are also making very significant strides in relation to the offshore in terms of exploiting and seeking to produce their offshore resources. And we believe that Barbados will be right behind these countries or right next to these countries once we get our work started. We issued and signed off effective licenses with Australian oil and gas company BHP Petroleum this year in January. The company is now set to commence its offshore exploration program. We believe that we have significant potential considering that BHP has also discovered significant gas resources in neighboring Trinidad and Tobago. Out of that discovery, we felt it necessary to sign a unitization treaty with the country so that we have a clear understanding for the joint exploitation and production of those resources once they're discovered in the future. So we're pressing ahead. BHP will start their work this year, and they actually want to fast-track the oil and gas program because of the advancements in the region and the competition in the region. It is really important for them to move as quickly as possible to identify and produce those potential resources. So they actually want to start with 3D data, which basically gives you a very clear indication of what your prospectivity is and the areas that you can drill. And we believe that within the next few years that we will be announcing the discovery of oil and gas resources offshore Barbados.
Final question, ma'am, is this. A couple of years ago, this ministry said that they were going to supply natural gas to all Barbados. And that was, everybody expected, and we came along and they got a lot of votes in that year because we were going to expand natural gas. Now, I was able to convince a former minister, I think he's here now. He was the chairman. He was chairman then. My friend, my good friend, and we were able to bring some natural gas into the heartland of St. George. You have it up at Shafak, and when Shafak came in, we were pleased because you brought him because of a commercial entity. So that at first, only 1 or 2 persons were able to connect because of the business. Then persons along the line connect. But since Shafak came to Charwell Bridge, and we have a number of bakeries, I'm sure you have the best bakery in Barbados, Carter's Bakery, basically the best salt bread and street bread and thing. And we have other bakeries. But there are people in central, the Glebe, Parish Land, Constant, all this area are in need of natural gas. I want to find out why the minister has stopped the expansion. Is the minister has stopped it or the ministry? Or what has happened? What has happened that we have not been seeing the expansion? At one time we were supposed to sign a treaty with Trinidad to bring natural gas into Barbados on a pipeline. I remember that. I remember we were told about that 15 years ago to sign the treaty. And when your officer reminded me that he had signed a treaty with Trinidad, then I remember this natural gas thing. So I want to find out what plans you have for the expansion of natural gas across all my constituencies, because they have always asked me about that. And natural gas is very cheap. We want to have some cheap gas as well. What is the position on that? Thank you.
I will try to answer as many of the subsections of that question as we possibly can, and probably to provide a fuller answer, I won't just limit it to your constituency, but deal with the natural gas plan for the rest of Barbados. Ask Mr. James Brown to deal with that.
Good morning, Minister. MPC has been providing natural gas for the last 30-odd years. And like you said, it's been quite cheap. But when you have something cheap, you still need margins to be able to reinvest capital. Now, one of the issues that we have with the expansion of natural gas is to recover enough capital to conduct our expansion. Now, I can go into the details of the expansion. The cost for expansion of a natural gas pipeline is approximately $86 to $100 per linear foot. When we run our numbers and we looked at the different catchment areas and so forth, the cost recovery takes approximately 38 to 50 years to recover. Now remember, we are fossil fuel free in 10 years, not actually 9.5 years or 9-point-something years. So there's no recovery for that segment of our customer base. Now, normally, domestic customers are subsidized or cross-subsidized by commercial entities. That's why I remember when you mentioned the Shafak. The Shafak installation probably funded approximately 300 to 1,000 domestic households. That was the cross-subsidy. When we initiate the new vision with regards to moving away from fossil fuels, many other commercial customers that we really need to subsidize also moved away and started invested in solar energy and so forth. So it's a challenge for MPC to expand. Now we can expand, but mind you, if there are certain financial conditions that the company has to maintain, as a commercial entity, we have to be financially viable. Before, natural gas was social type element that, you try to empower the poor in the community and so forth, and you want to bring a product to the domestic customers so that the older folks didn't have to walk with a ball to the gas station and so forth. However, in the early 2000s, we realized that we don't have enough cash to survive. At one point, MPC had approximately $187 in their bank account. Now, when you look at an expansion program, is going to cost a minimum $200,000. We didn't have enough money to do one program. And then when you look at our balance sheets, that illustrate millions of dollars of losses over the last couple of years, you can't go to the bank either. So you had an entity that was not financially viable to have a sustainable product being presented to the community. So what the company had to do is to look at how we invested in our expansion. We had to look to see anytime we had a bunch of domestic communities, we need to make sure it was anchored by a commercial entity. And that's what we do now. And also, we also look for synergies with the Ministry of Public Works. If there was a road being excavated or repaired, we try to jump in there. And then we try to also maximize the amount of customers on that end. Now, we do say that people want natural gas, but in some cases, we can go down the street. One case, we invested $250,000 in an expansion program, 50 customers on that line, only 24 connected. We had another, so sometimes it's between 20 to 40% because persons are not, they don't plan to invest in the installation at the same time that we put our pipelines down. Customers necessarily may speak about natural gas, but when you ask them to spend the connection fee, now the connection fee is approximately $450 for the customer. However, for the MPC, it is $1,500 plus. So there's a cross-subsidization there. There's a long time to recovery, and there's the fact that sometimes the customers may not necessarily want it as much as we think that they want it as well. So MPC does plan some expansion. We have a limited expansion. We do have to watch our costs because as with the Water Authority, we do have mains inside the infrastructure that have been sitting there for the last 50 years. Those need to be repaired. We were able to reduce our gas loss from 20% down to 4%, but because of the age of the pipeline, we do have to invest in some capital to repair some other pipelines. So there's some capital requirements that we need to fund. But yes, the company will have a limited expansion program, but there are some constraints, like I said before.
And I'm sure, Madam Chair, that...
Before you go, before you address it, let me just say one thing. Natural gas is seen as the bridging fuel to renewable energy. It has half the carbon emissions of burning coal. So in all of the countries that are looking to reduce their carbon footprint, the fossil fuel that they're pushing the use of is actually natural gas. So Barbados can become carbon neutral while still using natural gas, right? So we know what our policy is, we know what we're aiming at, but the reality is our obligations under the Paris Agreement, all of our other obligations do contemplate the use of natural gas. We have taken a decision to try to see if we can get to entirely fossil fuel free. But if we didn't reach there and we had to use natural gas, it still would not take away from the overall vision of becoming carbon neutral. I hope that explains something.
Yeah. I'm of the view that if you approach the Ministry of Economic Affairs, for example, and you have a blueprint that we have to increase the cost of the actual natural gas, the installation and so on, and the sensible thing, and you're efficient because we note that in the Ministry of, along the coast, West Coast last year, you were not so efficient. Many hotels went without natural gas suddenly, and it caused a lot of problems within in that area. And if you're efficient, I'm sure those businesses wouldn't mind paying an additional cost for efficient service.
On a point of order, ma'am, just for the sanctity of the record, my honorable friend means 3 years ago. No such thing happened last year. I just want to make that clear. It did happen, but it happened about 3 or 4 years ago.
Thank you.
True, I'm talking about 3 or 4 years ago, even though I saw a newspaper clipping recently that somebody was without natural gas and had to turn away the guests. So, but we want to be an efficient service, and I know that you have been doing a good job. Barbadians want you to do a good job. even if the cost has to be increased a bit, because I believe a bottle of gas, a normal 25 pound bottle of gas costs about $35, whereas natural gas is about $4. So we're saying that even if you have to increase the cost to $10, but you have an efficient, my question is being efficient, you know, an efficient service, we will help you on this one.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Before we move on, following on something the Honourable Member has said, I am trying to, what are the environmentalists saying about our proposed drilling offshore? I mean, we talk a lot about becoming carbon neutral in 9 years. How does that mesh with it? If somebody could answer me.
That would be Dr. Seeley, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. As my colleague indicated, the government has put out an invitation to BHP Billiton to do exploration work and exploitation of the hydrocarbon reserves if they're found. As part of that, a comprehensive environmental impact assessment has had to be conducted. I think it's the first one that we've done for offshore. So it is an environmental impact assessment that has been done. We will seek to mitigate any environmental impacts from exploration and exploitation. I just wanted to also clarify how you can be carbon neutral and still use a fossil fuel. And there are two ways to achieve that. One is every country that has forests have a sink, a way of absorbing the carbon, and that goes into the negative column. So if we can increase the amount of sinks that we have, in other words, just plant trees, we would offset the emissions from the burning of the natural gas. A second way to do it is to purchase credits from others. And this is an international carbon market that is being set up under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So a number of our industrialized partners will purchase credits in order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So Barbados might be in a situation where we'll have to purchase credits to maintain that carbon neutrality.
Just to expand on the answer to your question, Madam Chair, and this might give you some measure of comfort. The EIAs that were produced in relation to the BHP license went through an exceedingly rigorous process. Even when we were at the point of almost finalizing, the Minister of the Environment sent it back, and he wanted country-specific concerns addressed. So the Ministry of the Environment in Barbados added on, so our ministry, the Ministry of Energy, took the boilerplate EIA, and we were specific as the concerns that we, the ministry, had. Even after we had done that, the Ministry of the Environment came back with its own country-specific concerns as, because we're a tourist destination, what we can do with in respect of A, B, and C, and we sent back again. So by the time we finished, we had perhaps the most comprehensive EIA that was ever done in relation to something like this. So I am happy to say, yes, and all of the stakeholders in Barbados were consulted in relation to this. So tourism was consulted, health, environment. I'm struggling with some bad handwriting. What was it? CZMU, all of the major stakeholders who would have a concern to raise, and also the international sector and the Commonwealth was invited to comment on and weigh in on our EIA. So it eventually got the approval of the minister responsible for the environment. By that time, it was, as I said, a most comprehensive document. So we can't stop something from happening, but we know we've taken all precautions and we know how we would respond in the event of a situation. So I'm comfortable with the EIA and that we've ticked all the environmental boxes and not just tick them for the sake of form, but actually having applied our mind to specific concerns relevant to Barbados, we've addressed those as best we could.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the
So,
Honourable Member
Mr. White would just like to add to that, ma'am.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what the Minister was saying, as he did indicate, we had a full group of stakeholders that provided feedback and comments on the EIA. And in terms of the Barbados-specific concerns, we made sure that we requested from the company to submit, for example, an oil spill contingency plan, matters relating to the impacts on tourism, fisheries, shipping, and coastal and recreational activities ongoing in the offshore. In addition to that, know that the company has been given permission to conduct their offshore exploration activities. Before they can start the seismic activities, before they can start any of the drilling activities under those licenses, they are mandated to conduct stakeholder consultations and local consultations with the Barbadian public and relevant stakeholders to ensure that they get and gather relevant feedback that can then inform the seismic and drilling operations. So that will also constitute one of the conditions of the approval as granted by the Minister of the Environment. So even though they have the permission to go ahead, there's still conditions they have to satisfy before they can actually commence certain operations.
Thank you. Feeling better already. Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question has to do with the water sector, and then I have 3 follow-up questions. I'm aware, Minister, that you and your team spoke at length yesterday about the issue of tanks for potable water and possibly non-potable water. I am not sure to what extent you went into the details, because I will confess that yesterday was an action-filled one for the government of Barbados. And so I apologize in advance if you may have covered some of these matters already. I know that the matter of household access to water is of utmost importance to you and your ministry, and indeed this administration. I note the comments of the Honourable Member for St. George North with respect to standpipes, but I feel compelled to point out the burden of care that is associated with the use of standpipes. Certainly, community water sources are not the best case solution for a country like Barbados in the year 2020 of our Lord. So while I take the point with respect to the cultural significance that attaches, those who have to use standpipes then have an increased burden of care and work for the work that they do compared to having piped water in your home. If I have to pick up a bucket, and I think it is clear to all of us that most of those people who have that increased burden of care are women. If I have to pick up a bucket and clothes and whatever it is and walk to the standpipe, fill it, depending on how far it is, I then have something heavy to walk back to the house with. This is a time use issue, because all the time I'm doing that, I'm not in otherwise productive work. And so I get the sentimentality. I know that though that the Honourable Member only used the standpipe when his pipe water was not working. So I would not want us to use this as any standard for what we want to provide to Barbadian people in the year 2020. I take the point that as a backup, we might want to have some that remain in use, but I applaud the Minister and the Ministry for prioritizing local household access of piped water. And in that regard, I wanted to ask about the fact that when we, from the planning perspective, when we made the stipulation that every home above a certain square footage should have tanks, there was not the attendant focus and emphasis on the other infrastructure that was required to be able to make those tanks useful. And so the issues of pumps and the dual reticulation pipes and all of these things that would be necessary meant that we didn't go the extra mile to make sure that this infrastructure was also part of the stipulation from the planning perspective. And so we had a case where people got tanks, they put them on the property, the box was checked, but those tanks were not in any way useful for the household for any purpose. So I wanted to ask you, what is the plan? And I heard you speak about the financing element yesterday, so you need not go into that again. But what is the plan for making sure that this stipulation also brings with it a stipulation for the attendant infrastructure, to make sure that we're not just checking a box, but from the perspective of being ready for a disaster, from the perspective of making sure households actually have sustainable water access, how are we going forward on this matter?
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'm going to ask Dr. Jean Mwanza to help us with this one.
Good morning. A committee has actually been set up, a technical committee, to look at a policy that will address the rainwater harvesting storage requirements as well as potable water storage requirement. As pointed out by the Minister Clarke, the previous requirement for rainwater storage spoke to houses above a certain size being required to install rainwater storage. And when that was implemented, what was lacking was the technical specifications in how those tanks were to be connected to ensure that the water in the tanks did not end up mixing with the potable water supply from the BWA. Additionally, the issue of how you maintain the tanks was not adequately addressed. Those are some of the elements we have identified in our review, and the recommendations that we are looking at will ensure that we address that. In fact, there were cases in the old requirement where people would have installed a tank, had it inspected, and it was only rented out and did not stay on the property. But they got their tax rebate and then gave back the tank. Those are issues that we have to address. Additionally, for the potable water requirements, under the current Department of Emergency Management recommendations, they actually stipulate that you keep 2 liters of water per person per day. But what is not made clear is that that 2 liters of water per person per day is only intended for drinking water purposes. And they also stipulate that that storage should be for 3 days. We have realized that 3 days, based on the recovery periods across the region when we have had disruptions due to hurricane damage, are longer than the 3 days. So what is being looked at is a longer period, and we are looking at a minimum of 14 days storage. Also, we are also looking at providing 50 liters per person per day, which is recommended by the World Health Organization, because 50 liters allows you to use that water for more than just drinking. And so going forward, when this technical committee has concluded its review, we hope to see each house being provided with storage for potable water and storage for rainwater harvesting. And in looking at the policy under this technical committee, there are two other policies that we are looking at. The government in April last year approved a water reuse policy. And that water reuse includes water from all sources. So we have to ensure that what we provide for applies to that. Additionally, one of the concerns that was raised with regard to the present rainwater harvesting arrangement was that it was prescribed for non-potable uses only. However, even though it was prescribed for non-potable uses only, due to the fact that the plumbing system that we have at present did not allow for the users to use it, for example, to flush the toilet, most people ended up saying, I don't have anywhere I can use this water because I only have a few plants. So going forward, we are working with the Barbados National Standards Institute to be able to revise the plumbing code as quickly as possible so that when we go forward and say you could install your potable water storage and you could install the rainwater storage tank, that we are protecting the two systems and ensuring that the two waters don't mix, which would constitute a public health threat.
Dr. Zilli.
Thank you, Minister. I just wanted to add to what Dr. Mwan has indicated, because he's looked at it or he's given the perspective of an individual household and how that have an impact on water access. When you harvest the rainwater, you have the potable water storage. I just would like to draw the committee's attention to well, the national significance of this if this is multiplied by tens of thousands of households. So if we had all of Barbadian households that had a potable water storage tank, a rainwater storage tank, and also a way to get the storm water back into the ground, in other words, we improve the drainage around the house as well, then that goes a long way to managing our water resources much better. We have an inherent vulnerability as a small island that we have very little above ground or below ground water storage. But if each individual household put in water storage, that goes a long way to, in terms of national significance. The honourable member that asked the question is also quite familiar with our flagship climate change resilience project, Roofs to Reefs. And under the Roofs to Reefs project, we intend to target 30,000 households, amongst them the most vulnerable, where our intention is to install rainwater harvesting, potable water, solar PV panels, stormwater drainage, and better sanitation as well. Thank you, Chair.
I'd just like the Chair of the Water Authority to complete the answer.
Yes, good morning, all. In addition to what has been indicated, we would have stated yesterday that one of the directives we've received from government has been the provision of a tank program, personal tank program. We are in the process of putting together the program itself in a way that will ensure that it is accessible to the public at large. And we are costing it right now, and we'll be coming back to government later on with the proposed costing, and we'll be asking for assistance because the Barbados Water Authority is in a financial crisis that we're trying to get out of.
Thank you. My first follow-up question is a bit of a follow-on from the question that was asked by the member for Christchurch West Central, and having to do with the matter of rights to access to water. Now, I confess that this may be a bit unfair, what I'm about to ask, because it is a natural progression from that conversation, but it perhaps does not entirely fall squarely or at all within this ministry. But I need to raise it because of its association. Now, we have a similar issue with another target that we have under the Reefs to Roofs program, which has to do with expanding access to waterborne facilities at the household level. And just as we had challenges with respect to ownership of land or permission of the landlord to give rights to install water, we have a similar challenge for some different reasons to the question of waterborne facilities. Now, I think that we similarly have to start to move to a place where we see water and sanitation as a twin right, adequate water and sanitation, because there's similar public health issues in each of those areas. And so I wanted to ask you, Minister, and your team, what is the thinking, perhaps from the legislative perspective, on how we can start to expand this issue to look at waterborne facilities, understanding that we are talking about some different matters having to do with the erection of what we might call a permanent structure, although permanent is perhaps subjective. But I believe that we have to advance this conversation, and I want to get your team's thinking on that.
Minister, I note that you, at the beginning, started by saying this is perhaps an unfair question, and it is not my ministry. What I can tell you is where you have households that are in need of waterborne facilities and the appropriate ministry, whether it be social care, whether it be town and country planning, makes provision for it, the Water Authority will do its part and supply the water. But I can say that we have not given any consideration to the provision of waterborne facilities, because that's actually not what we do at all. We're looking at solutions in relation to certain areas, solutions, for example, in relation to the Bell and Lake Ridge Village, where it is not simply a matter of putting down a waterborne facility, because you have the constraints, once again, of being in a Zone 1, prime plumb in the middle of Zone 1, where the travel distance from the surface to the aquifer is minimal, and there are public health concerns. We're looking at the options and the engineering to minimize that, whether it's by putting in the appropriate wells and facilities, septic tanks, or whether it's by sewering. We're looking at those, but with respect to the actual provision of the waterborne facilities, that does not fall on us, and I cannot even begin to see where we will find the fiscal space with our limited constraints to even attempt that. So mercifully, I am happy to say that one does not fall under our ministry, and I look forward to hearing the solution as well. Go ahead.
Thank you, Minister, for allowing me to come back on this. We are aware that under the Ministry of Housing and Lands, with the UDC and the RDC, there's a pit toilet eradication program. We still have several thousand pit toilets in the country, and it is the government's policy to remove those pit toilets and replace them with waterborne sanitary facilities. I like your proposition, Honourable Member, that water and sanitation should be considered as a pair, and that when we provide water, you're obviously also creating a sanitation issue, because 90% of that water is now going to become wastewater. And that is the approach that we are taking under the Rooster Reefs. That is also the approach that is an underlying philosophy under the new water protection and land use policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister, for humoring the question. I realize that it is not strictly within your purview, but in the spirit of not having a siloed approach to government, I felt that it was something that needed to be raised at this time. And thank you as well, Dr. Seeley, for your very clear response. My third question has to do with another part of the Roofs to Reefs program, but this time with respect to the use of renewable energy technologies. And really, what is the regulatory process around being able to establish and run projects in this area? And I'll explain what I mean. We have spent quite a lot of time and continue to spend quite a lot of time on the issue of planning and development and the applications, making sure that we are able to cut down the response time, making sure that we completely reform our approach to how we facilitate investment in this country. As we work at the level of the Town and Country Planning Department, we manage a relationship and an entire ecosystem that involves several ministries, departments, and agencies across government. Now, what we found since passing the new legislation in January of last year is that, in fact, there are several other parts of that ecosystem that have to work alongside us in order to get us to the eventual outcome, which is an expedited response on an application, whether it's a tourism investment or renewable energy investment or any other kind. Now, we have an issue where we have to understand the balance in the context of the physical development plan, the balance of agricultural production, of renewable energy generation, renewable energy generation or energy generation from renewable sources, and the coexistence of those. And we also have to be able to provide, on the side of the Ministry of Energy, a regulatory process that in a way matches the timelines that we have targeted for planning and development. Because if we are able to have a decision for a developer within 12 weeks, and there is not a similar timeline from the Ministry of Energy, then our ultimate outcome of being able to drive growth and development in a timely way to be able to provide jobs for Barbadians is going to be threatened. So I wanted to ask Minister and your team a little bit about your regulatory process, as well as your thinking on the coexistence of RE technologies, for example, solar PV, and agricultural production, because it's a regulatory issue that we are confronting.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for your question. In the context of the Roofs to Reefs program, as you indicated, installation of solar PV panels is part of that program. So this is going to be at the household level, at the rooftop level for individual households. And these solar PVs would be battery connected in the event of a catastrophic loss of the grid. The whole idea is to build resilience at home and create these oases of resilience at the household level. At the more commercial scale level of the renewable energy, where we're now talking about ground-mounted solar PV panels, you have indicated there could be a conflict with land use, especially if the developer wishes to convert arable land under active cultivation to renewable energy. And this is not something unique to Barbados. This conflict, other countries are facing the same issue. However, there are solutions. There are ways to have dual use of the land. With solar panels, if the panels are mounted high enough, you can actually cultivate underneath those panels. And there are some studies that indicate that you actually get more yield from some crops because of the shade that's provided, because of the moisture retention that the panels actually provide. For wind turbines, of course, the wind turbine takes up much less of a footprint in the land, and it's quite common now to have dual usage with the wind turbine, with agriculture going on around it. I believe, Minister, you would ask the PS to address the regulatory issues that you've raised. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning, and thank you, Minister, for the question. You are correct. The The opportunity to increase the penetration of renewable energy requires the ministry to work with a myriad of different agencies. The process of reviewing an application would require, first of all, that the applicant should have received approval from Town and Country Planning Department, as well as approval for the system from the Government Electrical Engineering Department. With those two approvals, then they submit that information along with their application to the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources. On receipt of that application, we then seek to review, as prescribed by the Electric Light and Power Act, the financial capability and technical capability of the installer, of the applicant, to be able to install those systems and to be able to maintain those systems. There are challenges sometimes in the presentation of the information where the information may come in and it is not completed. There's sometimes the applicant might have received a conditional approval from the Town Country Planning Department, and it is not actual approval. They may have to continue to do additional work, and that retards the speed in how quickly we're able to process that application. Sometimes the Government Electrical Engineering Department may require that the system has an impact assessment from the utility, which means that they have to determine, the utility will then determine the proposed site or location for where that penetration, that renewable energy is expected to be sited on the grid, what will be the impact on the grid if it is placed in that particular location. So we then have to get that impact assessment from the utility to help in the assessment of the application. Once these all come together, then the ministry, our technical team, would then do that assessment, and we have the Electric Light and Power, which is part of its role has been concretized within the legislation. The recommendation then is advanced to that committee, which normally meets once a month. And if necessary, depending on the volume that comes in, sometimes they may meet more frequently than once a month. And then from that, that sitting of the committee, their recommendation then is advanced to the minister for his approval. So that explains the process and cycle for how the applications are reviewed.
Honorable Member, I do wish to say, I think energy is one of the most dynamic industries. I mean, the name is energy. It is one of the most dynamic ministries, and we are constantly looking at ways to reduce the lag in our processes. I believe if we're trying to get investors into Barbados, whether it be for development of our RE space, or whether it be for financial investment or even in the tourism sector, what is appealing to an investor is certainty and speed. Nobody having made a decision that they want to invest or they want to consider investing wants to then be tied up in a whole set of governmental processes that may take a year or years, because they involve a number of unnecessary steps that were once appropriate, but in this age of technology are no longer appropriate. So the point is, as you have been doing in your ministry, as Ms. has been doing, I think we need to take a critical, objective look at all of our processes and try to figure out ways that can best streamline those processes and then encourage that investment that we as a country so need. So within our ministry, we are looking at the processes involved in the application and granting of a license and trying to shorten that time frame as short as possible while still preserving the integrity of the process.
Thank you. I welcome that reform because it will certainly assist the efforts on our side. My last question is very short. This year is a census year in Barbados. We believe that we will soon be able to announce officially August 1st as Census Day, and we are mobilizing to be able to carry out this very, very important survey that gives us a lot of critical baseline information across a range of sectors. One of the questions that we ask in the census at the household level is whether the household is using renewable energy technology. And it will be interesting, I think, in this year to find out what that number is, but I wanted to ask whether, in the context of Roofs to Reefs and all the other targets that you have, whether there is a target in mind in terms of the number of households that are employing renewable energy technologies for their personal use.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. I hope that in the questionnaire, in the census, that solar hot water systems are defined as renewable energy systems as well, because they are, and we save considerable amounts of fossil fuels already from the, I believe, one of the highest penetration rates in the world of solar hot water systems. As for your question on the targeted penetration for households with renewable energy, under the Roofs to Reefs, our target is 30,000 households, which is approximately a third of our households. 30,000 houses with 3 kilowatt equivalent systems on them. If I do my arithmetic right, that's approaching 90 megawatts of capacity, which is a significant portion of distributed generation. It will, I'm not saying it will be a technical challenge for our grid, but there are also some social factors there that are beyond my capacity. This is literal empowerment of the citizens. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. James Brown, I'm going to ask Mr. James Brown to inform us of BNOC's RE push.
Thank you, Minister. Because of the 2030 vision, BNOCL had to reinvent its position, its strategy. We looked at our portfolio, and we realized that as part of the instrument of government to push government policy, we need to get into the RE space as well. And we also looked at the fact that part of our guiding principles was to continue to empower the poor, and also to be a social element, and also to, one of our basic principles was to bring energy to each home. So since RE and solar panels and PV is the energy of the future, we have decided that in looking at the entire portfolio of the BNOC and our principles and values, that, and also the fact that the RE space, in terms of PV installations, persons only think of the rich and the middle class that can afford PVs. We realized that there was a certain segment of society, the poor, the middle class, and the persons that couldn't really afford certain things in life. PV is something that lots of people would like to want, as opposed to necessarily need. The board and the management and staff have been now decided that part of our new strategy would be to try to empower those and try to look at those 30,000 homes and try to install at least, at minimum is 10% of that. The maximum is to look to see if we can do all 30. The worst case of, and based on that overall strategy, BNOCL has implemented and kicked off a pilot project which we plan to roll out for the next, as a part of our business. This is a domestic program. We look to install solar panels on the homes throughout the country. We start with our staff. We would like to start off, our initial year is to install PVs on 300 homes in the first year, and to ramp up to see if we can get up to the 3,000 target per year. Part of our portfolio and our business plan was to leverage our commercial business into getting PV panels at distributor prices, all the equipment, all the batteries and so forth associated with the solar panels. BNOC has already secured that part of the business so that we can bring a lower cost solution to most domestic customers. So we have systems available for our 2 kilowatt systems are as low as $60 a month. We have a lease program as opposed to a purchase program because we do realize that people don't have the available capital to invest in solar panels. So the lease program is something that we've rolled out internally to our staff and parts of government right now. And that's the push to try to at least empower the 30,000 household that was stated earlier.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This question I want to direct specifically to the Minister. And we've been talking a lot about renewable energy. And I want specifically to ask about the project of the Ministry itself as it relates to the renewable energy program that is at Lakes Folly, the PV installation. And what has been the experience of the Ministry with that installation and with renewable energy projects in total?
I'm going to ask Ms. Keisha Reed. Especially with Keisha. Keisha, come. Mr. Halliday will first address the Lakes Folly aspect because it's a Barbados Water Authority project.
The project at Lakes Folly was really born out of an initiative that the Barbados Water Authority had competed for and had successfully won both first and second prize in those bids for the installation of PV systems both at Lakes Folly and at Bowminston. But this also followed a deliberate strategy that the Barbados Water Authority had taken over the years where these 2 additional PV systems would have carried our systems up to at least 6. And many people are not aware that the Barbados Water Authority has actively been embarking on this project, or the strategy. So we have systems currently at Carlton, Lakes Folly, or Bridgetown sewage plant system, Applewaite, Bowminston, Hampton, and recently we have commenced at the Bell. But to address the topic specifically, at Lakes Folly, that project was successfully completed under a grant program offered by the UAE, and we are currently realizing savings of about $22,000 a month, which has averaged out at about $60,000 per quarter. So we're quite satisfied with where that is going, and we hope to be able to bring all of the other systems that we've been pursuing on stream as well.
Ms. Reed.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, members. I will just speak a bit about the other programs that the Ministry of Energy is currently implemented, and I'll start with the Public Sector Smart Energy Program. This program is in its final year, and one of the key objectives is to be able to improve the efficiency across government. So under this program, as it specifically relates to renewable energy, we would have already installed approximately 2.4 megawatts of renewable energy systems across 16 government buildings. And I won't call all of them, but that includes the Grantley Adams International Airport, the engineering building. We would have also installed at the Bridgetown Port and Barbados Community College, Coast Guard, Barbados Agriculture Development and Marketing Corporation, Lloyd Erskine Standard Center, and we would have also installed at the NIS building, Frank Walker building. The expected output for this project is approximately a savings of 3.8 megawatts per year, which would save the government $1.8 million in electricity costs. The systems would have been installed throughout the last 2 years. We had done them in phases, and the last system being connected would have been Barbados Community College and the airport in December. So we're at the process currently where we're monitoring the actual output of the systems. For the most part, we've been seeing production levels on par for what we expect, and we'll be shortly handing over their system to the relevant beneficiaries to continue with their own operations. And that's specifically under the Public Sector Smart Energy Program. When we actually did the tender for procurement, the solar PV costs would have drastically reduced from when the project was planned. So we had some savings to the project. And instead of canceling those funds, we would have agreed to do additional building. So we're about to start phase 2, where we'll be focusing on 7 government buildings, including the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and a number of police stations and 1 school. And we selected the buildings based on, we would have done a detailed investigation looking at the structural assessment of the buildings, because we recognized when we did the first phase, we had a number of issues with roofs having challenges and lack of maintenance across the, over the years, where buildings were not best suited for solar at this time. So in future projects, we know that one of the things we may need to do is invest a bit more in terms of actual roof repairs, even though that's not the intention of the project, but you have to do that in order to be able to make the installation. The Public Sector Smart Energy Program is funded by the IDB and the EU, and as I said, it's slated to end this year. And it doesn't only look at renewable energy, but we're also doing energy efficiency across 15 government buildings. The procurement for that should be finalized shortly. And in general terms, you're expected to save an additional 30% with the introduction of energy efficient air conditioning and lighting across government. The project is also includes the capacity building and institutional strengthening assessment, as the minister and the PS spoke to earlier. We are reviewing not only the ministry's way of doing things, but also across the government. There are various entities within our sphere that all form part of the ELPA process and other processes related to the sustainable energy sector. So we're reviewing all of these entities with a view of streamlining the processes across government, also looking at their human resource capacity and also the management tools they need to employ to be able to improve. So the project has the hardware on one end, but it's also looking at the human resources within government to improve the way of doing business. Additionally, we would have just signed, and that loan contract was actually tabled in Parliament today, the Sustainable Energy Investment Program Phase 2. And I won't go into detail in terms of that entire program, but just to say that under that program, we will be building on the work we would have done under the Public Sector Smart Energy Program. And we're seeking to do an additional 100 to 150 government buildings with renewable energy and energy efficiency. So we're actually having a larger target for that program. And we'll also be seeking to expand on, we did a modest electric vehicle pilot where we purchased 8 vehicles, and under that program, we'll be buying a lot more. So we'll be expanding on the work that we previously did to be able to across government, because it's easy to tell persons, well, you are the person that's supposed to be more efficient, and we want the general public to be more efficient, but the government Barbados is actually doing it themselves. We want you to understand that we're also in this, we're in this together. So we are seeking to improve our efficiency in government and also maximize the use of renewable energy with the projects in the ministry, as well as with our SOEs, BNOC, and Barbados Water Authority.
Mr. Halliday, can you just flesh out a little bit what you said?
Okay, thank you, Minister. Just to add, and I think I mistakenly said Apple Ridge, I should have said Golden Ridge, but to give a sense of the total projected savings that the Barbados Water Authority is anticipating, certainly with the current operations, we're talking about roughly savings of $700,000 a year, and with the planned PV installations that we'll have in place over the next 2 or 3 years, we should take that up to $3.6 million. I thought it was particularly important that we emphasize that. Thank you.
Just one follow-up question, and it always intrigues me that everybody speaks of the savings from photovoltaic installations, but what I would prefer to understand is what is the rate of return? In other words, say at Lakes Folly, you've made a savings of $20,000 on the electricity, but what did the system actually cost to install? So if you made a savings of $20,000, that's $240,000 in a year. But I wanted to know what is the cost. In other words, how many years would have to be gone through before you've paid back for the installation?
Fortunately for us, Minister, it's almost 100%. That particular facility was all grant funded with the exception of approximately 200,000 in civil works. So for us, when we look at the horizon, let's say of 10 years, we're looking at approximately 95 to 100% return.
No, that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking, not if the money was free, I'm asking how much it costs. How much did it actually cost in dollars and cents? So that, for instance, if somebody else is doing it, they would have an idea of how long it would take to pay back for that system. How much did it cost, if you know?
Okay. I don't have the exact figure to hand. The two facilities in total cost about $3 million.
Thank you. That is all.
That is $3 million US dollars.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you to the Minister, I just want to indicate, certainly on behalf of the government, that as we have worked hard to provide a stable economic environment financially, that I think is important to also recognize that over the last 21 months, that the work conducted by certainly the Barbados Water Authority in bringing resolution to the South Coast, and I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague from Christchurch West Central, that whilst we were focusing on the financial side, the reality is that the infrastructural works that were done on the South Coast created another layer of confidence in not just the people of Christchurch or the residents that were immediately affected, but certainly added to the stability that one would expect from an economy that is looking to provide investors with confidence, businesses with confidence, consumers with confidence. And I really want to commend you, Minister, for leading the charge in this respect. As you indicated in your opening comments in response, that you work with the other agencies within health and environment. And so that as we have arrived at this place, I want to underscore that it was just as important, the work that we were doing with the debt restructuring and putting the public finances back on a sound footing, that just as important as that work, I think the work that was done certainly by this ministry and certainly with the work of the Barbados Water Authority, that the stability that we are enjoying now with respect to the financial status of the country, that work was just as important, if more important, with respect to being able to provide stability for the country. I really do want to congratulate you on that. I know the honourable member for St. James Central referred to the free flow of effluent, and I understand the sentiment in terms of what he meant, but there was nothing free about the solution that was certainly engineered by the Barbados Water Authority working with the private sector. And it speaks to the fact that leadership is often required in order to find solutions to very difficult problems. And whilst I know that we still have a ways to go with respect to the financing of the tertiary upgrade, I want, through you, Madam Chair, to say to Barbadians that the government has sought to determine a path forward that allows for the country to build resilience across communities, and therefore we will continue to ensure that we provide the appropriate financing mechanisms that will allow for that to happen in the shortest possible time. But I want to get to some issues specifically to energy now and water. My grandmother, in the mid-80s, when we got our first installation of pipe water, always said to me and my cousins that water and current don't mix. And I know, Minister, that your ministry focuses on both water resources as well as energy. And I think for a large segment of the population, and I represent a large part of Christchurch East Central, where, for example, the substation at Kennedy Hill provides the electricity, but the water comes from Hampton, which obviously is serviced by another source of electricity in terms of the substation that will supply that. So I think the ministry, certainly going forward, and with the relevant agencies, I think there needs to be a sensitization of Barbadians in terms of how the logistics around where they perceive their energy is coming from, where the water is coming from, and the mechanics of how that is delivered. Because certainly in the last few weeks where we had those outages, persons were reaching out to me as their MP saying, well, my electricity is on, but I'm not getting water. Because obviously coming out of the issues last year with the light and power, where it was a national shutdown, it speaks to lack of either understanding with respect to communication as to where persons' supply of both electricity and water comes from, and how that is impacted on a daily basis. So I think that's something that certainly the ministry has to sensitize Barbadians more in terms of how their services are delivered to them within this context. And I think, whilst I don't need you to respond to that, I want to say you have to sensitize people as to where these things are coming from and how they're impacted immediately. But I want to say that in the discussion that I've heard so far, and as you know, Minister, I believe 100% in renewable energy. As I've said before, I am off-grid, and I will encourage every Barbadian to go off-grid to build resilience. But I want to refer to something that I saw personally on a visit to Florida a few days after Hurricane Irma passed in 2017. It was 3 or 4 days. And it is important that as we seek to get the 100% renewable, and I absolutely agree with that, that as we are putting in the solutions with respect to the water tanks for persons in the country, that we also have to look at the fact that each household ought to have some kind of independent generation capacity with a generator that will use some kind of gasoline or diesel, because that is what allowed the communities across Florida, which took a number of months before the electrical, the grids actually were reinstated. Now, most PV installations, as my installer told me, only is good up to category 2. And as the storms are becoming much more intense, then I think the ministry has to look and see how it is going to roll out, in my view, a program that, whilst we are focusing on the water side, that individual households also have a generator, because in the event of a significant storm, I think it is important for not just the resilience, but certainly the security purposes in the immediate aftermath, that households can actively generate electricity, which will help to mitigate against the immediate fallout. So I would like to know, certainly from the Minister, if there's been any consideration with respect to that particular aspect, given that we are now in the process of seeking to deal with the installation of the actual water tanks for potable water to households across the country. And then I'll follow up with a couple of questions.
I'm almost afraid for the follow-up. Madam Chair, the ministry, on all of our projects, the ministry's standard is to a category 3 hurricane. The reality is solar PV installations are only as strong as the roof on which they are. So if you build and construct your house to category 5 standards, then we can bolt the PVs down. The PVs are not going to fly off without the roof. The roof and the PVs are generally going to go together. Our requirement for the ministry for approval of contracts is to category 3. Under the Roofs to Reefs program, I think the government's policy is to aim to upgrade the roofs to a category 4. So a lot of those issues should disappear with respect to the individuals and their ability to self-generate following disaster. I mean, the government can't force people to make themselves resilient. Some people will buy generators, some people will not. But if we also look at our PV systems, there are a lot of portable PV systems coming in the market, so people can roll out panels. So you can roll out a sheet of panels. Once the storm passes and the sun comes back, you have electricity generation. We're also trying to encourage people, if the honorable member is off-grid, that means he's off-grid with a combination of solar and battery backup. So people need to stop thinking of the RE solution as being solar panels. Solar panels help you to generate while the sun is shining. If you are trying to become off-grid or 100% resilient, then you need to look at what happens when the intermittency of your supply is affected. So solar generates during the day, fine. What happens at night? If you have battery storage combined with solar, then you can charge your batteries during the day while also supplying your house. At night, the house can use the batteries. The other thing that we're looking at is in the region of electric mobility, we're looking at the technological advancements that allow not just for you to charge your car, to drive the car, but allow the car to plug back in to supply electricity to the house in the event of a disaster. So all of these things are within the contemplation of the ministry and technology dependent. In some countries, I think Canada is developing a smart grid that allows people, allows the utility once a car is plugged in, to pull from that car as necessary. So the car becomes an actual generation asset of the grid. So in the same way that the solar panels are, that the utility is, that the wind turbines are, once the car is plugged in, the grid can actually use that as a feeder source for the supplying of electricity. Technology is advancing very, very quickly. The challenge is for us in Barbados is to keep up with that, but the technological solutions are there and we're trying to implement them and build on them because that is necessary for us to actually get to the 2030 aspect of it. One other thing, just to touch back, I like complete answers. To answer the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, the bulk of the RE, renewable energy installations and the PV installations, the payback period is 3 to 4 years. So and the rate of return is about 14%. So within 3 to 4 years, you've completely paid back. So everything you get on that PV system is profit. And just one other thing, Madam Chair, well, sorry, if I can ask Dr. Mwanza to come and address the logistics of getting the water from the well to the householder. But just for completeness as well, Madam Chair, the chair of the BWA had made the point, had said that the Water Authority is in a financial crisis. I wish to correct that slightly. The Water Authority is doing a lot better now with its management of its affairs, its collections, its expenditure, and its internal regulations than it was over the last 10 to 15 years. So the financial difficulties that the Water Authority finds itself in now are as a result of, not as a result of this current dispensation, but they were inherited. The financial crises of the Water Authority were inherited and were occasioned by a lot of bad and ill-advised contracts. But with the assistance of the Ministry of Finance and the government generally, we have been clawing our way out of it. Last budget, the Prime Minister took the Water Authority off the books of central government, and we've been left effectively to fend for ourselves with some assistance from government where necessary. And I must compliment the board and the management because the turnaround.
Just want to remind you that your answer is supposed to be 3 minutes. I've been nice so far.
So with the last 15 seconds, Madam Chair, the turnaround has been nothing short of miraculous, and I wish to commend the board and the management for following the vision of the government in this respect. But the financial issues are not of the making of this board, but these were inherited. So Dr. Mazin.
Good morning again. I agree with Mr. Strong. The understanding of the interrelationship between the power supply source and the water is something that we need to work on, and be able to explain to the public, because even yesterday I was talking about the St. Lucie situation, and one of the points that was identified was Bosco Bell gets its water from Lambert's rather than from Rock Hall. And what was interesting was that during the period of outages when Allendale, which supplies Half-Acre, and then you pump from Half-Acre to Lambert's, and from Lambert's to Bosco Bell, even though Allendale was off, Bosco Bell still had some water supply, which was a result of what was in storage in the tank at Bosco Bell. So some of our customers would have thought maybe they were getting their supply from a different source. And we have had similar situation, for example, in Sweetville. The power grid that feeds Sweetville, when it goes off, is not anywhere in that location, but it affects our Greens pumping station, it affects Sweetville, and it affects Bomerston. So I accept the recommendation, and we will work to be able to identify so that the customers understand the relationship between our supply and where the water comes from.
And even more pointed than that, Madam Chair, there's instances where along the exact same road, there are mains on either side of the road feeding from different sources. So I was once in St. Lucie with the honorable member for St. Lucie, and which was having some challenges. And one person on one side was saying they had not had water for a couple of days. Well, the person right directly opposite them, so you walk across the road into the other yard, and they had no water issues. So maybe it is timely that we do try to inform Barbadians as to exactly how our system works and why some apparent anomalies do occur.
Madam Chair, just to follow up, because I think it's important that coming out of the national outage that we had last year with respect to the light and power, and I know that we are moving to a framework where we will have multiple entities generating electricity. So my question to certainly, well, whoever may be able to answer is, have we started to think about how do we trade energy in a situation where if I cannot, for whatever reason, produce the energy that is required, has there been any consideration for how do we create a market to trade energy so that those who can supply could augment the shortfall elsewhere? So I just want to get some clarity from the ministry in terms of what we are potentially thinking with respect to energy trading going forward in a situation where we have multiple entities generating energy in the country.
Thank you, Minister. As I indicated yesterday, the process of moving from a fossil fuel environment to one of renewables generation for electricity is a transformative process, and it requires us to examine a number of areas, including the legislative, the regulatory, and even the market structure. We are moving from one where we have a vertically integrated monopoly to one where we have several sellers and still one dominant player in terms of the buyer. In that market structure, what we are evolving is to make sure that the mandate from government to have as much local participation as possible. The Fair Trading Commission was recently installed a feed-in tariff to allow for the trade of energy for systems between 0 and 1 megawatt. It is expected that that size capacity will be increased up to 5 megawatts. Above that, The ministry is looking at how do we procure competitively capacity to help us increase the penetration and how quickly we can advance to 2030. So over the next couple of months, we will be designing that competitive strategy and framework to allow us, before the year is completed, to have our first initial competitive procurement for renewable energy. So essentially, we will have a hybrid system operating where we have a FIT at one end and a competitive procurement system also operating simultaneously for us to advance the renewable energy sector. And that is how the trade will occur, because through the competitive process, the price will evolve in that situation, while the FTC, through the execution of the FIT, will design the tariff for which the trade of the energy under that system will be facilitated with the light and power.
Thanks for that, but
FIT is feed-in tariff.
Sorry?
Just for the record, FIT is feed-in tariff.
I'm aware. But just for the record, I'm just referring to the fact that with increasing outages, then whatever the protocol is with respect to how where one may have excess capacity, that the disruption is minimized, because obviously you're looking at the demand on the grid, and therefore whatever the framework to ensure that the householder or the business person isn't disrupted over a prolonged period, that clarity in terms of who is going to supply the excess to in a sense fill the shortfall is where I'm not sure I've heard the response to, because at the end of the day, when people go home and they turn on the switch, they want electricity. And therefore, that's what I'm talking about, the minutiae precisely in terms of how, if something happens to a specific segment of the grid and there's capacity elsewhere, how do we get that done? And that's why I asked specifically about what is the thinking in terms of how that can be remedied until such time as that fault can be corrected. Because if we move into a smart grid, then we have to be capable of delivering that where possible. So I just want to hear some more on that, if you can.
Thank you, Honourable Member. So the root cause of the 40-hour outage that we had recently was a lack of excess generating capacity. We didn't have enough reserve generating capacity online, spinning, being able to come up quickly so that we could maintain the 50 hertz. And once we can't maintain the 50 hertz, then the system crashed. That matter is being addressed systematically by Light and Power, by bringing in emergency additional power generation, fossil fuel generation, and that's the bridging proposal from the Light and Power. Your question, though, relates to the future when we're primarily renewable energy, and then how do we put safeguards in place to ensure that there is not a further outage. Again, it comes to the issue of having excess generating capacity. The grid operator is going to have a dispatch priority, so if one generator goes down, he'll be able to bring in, or she'll be able to bring in another generator. It also goes to storage, because we will have a very high penetration rate of intermittent power. In ordinary language, a high percentage of solar and wind. And when the wind is not blowing or the sun is not shining, what do you do? So we're going to have to put in quite a lot of battery storage as well to maintain grid stability. We anticipate that we can go from the approximately 8–10% that we're at now to around 50% penetration without having much of an impact on the grid. Is when you go past that penetration from 50 to 75%, from 75% to 100%, then we will have to do significant work on making the grid smart and ensuring that now that we have thousands, literally thousands of generators, if you include all the rooftops, that system can be managed. Other countries in the world are doing it, but we will be on the cutting edge of this technology.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you very much. I'd like to commend the ministry again for all its work. But I'd like to bring us away perhaps from the usual areas and quiz members of your team a little bit in relation to disaster preparedness. I hope that is all right. Recently, when we had the 2-day power outage, it appears to me, and I don't think you would dispute it, that the Water Authority was unable to respond to the challenges that we faced. From my recollection, even though it was abroad, because there was no power available, Water Authority could not pump any water, and it therefore meant that most of Barbados was without a water supply. With the hurricane season being not too far off, I think it's not inopportune for us to discuss exactly what arrangements are being put in place. Well, I hope we don't have another water outage. Obviously, if we have a severe lash by a hurricane, then we will find ourselves in a difficult position. So I'd be grateful if the authority could indicate for us whether they have, at this point, some kind of contingency plan so that if for some reason the island should lose its power for whatever reason, the people of Barbados would continue to be supplied with water, which is so necessary for survival and sanitation.
Good morning again, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for your question. As on a point of correction, the Barbados Water Authority did have generation capacity, but we don't have generation capacity at all of our facilities. For instance, in total, the Barbados Water Authority has, between the wastewater and the potable water, 36 generators installed, but they're over 77 facilities when you combine the wastewater and the potable water. We've been trying to...
Give us those figures again, please. You have 30. How many
36 generators.
Over 70.
Over 77 facilities. So
what does that mean exactly?
Okay.
That you can only service 34 facilities?
We can only service the 36 now if power goes across the island as it did last time. We have been working over the last couple of years, every year, to add additional standby power at the facilities. But it is a matter of financing. We have actually been working out how much it would cost us to install at the remaining potable water facilities. There are about 38 remaining potable water facilities. And when we look at the supplying those facilities with just a basic standby generator, we'll be looking at about 4.5 million Barbados dollars. We are actually actively looking to see how we could finance that. We've been in discussion with the Barbados National Oil Company to see and looking at other avenues to see how we could finance that. But the financing of those standby generators for all of the other facilities is extremely expensive. We've been looking at battery backups as an alternative, seeing that we were looking at we have a goal in mind of the 2030 goal. But at this point in time, the cost of batteries is prohibitive, because if we were to go a battery backup for for those facilities, we'd be looking at about 65.5 million Barbados dollars. So we are actively looking at how we can provide that backup for the facilities, but the cost has been prohibitive in terms of being able to find that monies to provide that backup.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie. And the 36 generators that you have, which parts of Barbados? I don't need a generator by generator list, but which parts of Barbados would they cover? I'm sure that St. Joseph was without water when the electricity went off, but arguably we would have been without water even if the electricity was still on.
Okay, at that point in time, we did not have standby generators at many of the facilities that were providing water to St. Joseph. At this point in time, we have standby generator at some of those critical facilities. And in addition to what I've said before, these 36 generators that we have provide water for about 70 to 75% of the island once they are operational. But we are working, as I said, to find the financing to be able to outfit the remainder of the facilities.
Sure.
Yes, Minister. First of all, on behalf of the Barbados Water Authority, we would like to say that we truly understand what the people in your constituency are actually going through. We do everything within our power to ensure, certainly from the tanker system, to assist where and when we can. As Mr. Leslie has indicated, we are actively pursuing the ability to acquire the remaining generating capacity so as to ensure that when we are without electricity, that we will be able to supply water. The minister would have expressed earlier what we inherited, and with that in mind, we are doing a balancing exercise, totally mindful of the difficulties that people have been experiencing, which is why we have actively pursued the vineyard project out of our cash resources so as to ensure that the peoples of St. Joseph, St. John, St. Andrew, St. Thomas, who have all suffered greatly, can in some way experience relief.
One other thing, Chair, is it's not simply a matter of having the resilience when the current goes down. It is being able to protect our systems from any anomalies in the electricity supply. So sometimes you get a surge, and our equipment is very, very delicate. Because we take directly from the grid, quite often there's no actual buffer or protection, no surge protection effectively in our installations. So you might get a surge through the grid, and it knocks out a pump. Because the pumps and all the systems are not fully on the SCADA, sometimes the pump burns itself out because it hasn't been discovered. So we're trying to upgrade our system to make it fully automated and allow it to protect itself. So it's not simply to cover outages, but also to create the buffer that protects the integrity of our system, because sometimes people wouldn't even know they had a blip, but our pumps are down. And once the pumps are down and the pressure in the system drops, even when the pumps come back up, it takes a while to build the pressure back up in the network that allow people to get normal service. So it's not simply a matter of the electricity is down, it comes back on now, you should be getting water now. Once the tanks, the reservoirs have drained, you might be getting water 12, 18, 24 hours later because the pressure has to build back up into the system. The water is distributed by pressure in the pipe.
Anything else, member?
If I can come back to the matter of water and sanitation being a human right. Social media has already begun to explode your comment. And some people seem to have formed a view that that Water Authority is somehow going to facilitate people getting title to land simply by by providing them with water. Of course, that is an uninformed position. Let me say that I support you 100% in your stance and in the ministry's stance in relation to water being a human right. I was born in a standpipe generation. For the first 9 years of my life, I had to help carry water from the standpipe to our house. You'll be amused to know that because I was so small, I had to carry my water in a skillet. But every morning and every evening, we had to go to the standpipe. It was part of our experience. And I know what it is like not to have convenient access for water. I also have a number of constituents who, through no fault of their own, simply cannot get access to water because of the state of the title. I think Water Authority will need to talk Barbadians through this exercise. I will say that as important as water is, I think you also need to talk about sanitation as well. And I think you might be aware, Minister, of a small settlement at I think it's in the Bayland, Minister Humphrey's constituency, where those individuals have water toilets, have pit toilets and no water toilets. And the owner of the land, because they're squatters, have refused to allow them to connect to the sewage system. During the storm, during the hurricane of September 2018, that entire district had flooded out, and all of the pit toilets were submerged. So the risk of spreading dangerous disease was not limited just to the occupants, not just to the squatters, but to all of the Water Authority people who went in there to pump off the water, to all of the public works people, to all of the police and ambulance people, to the people in the surrounding community who were put at risk because of this. And I think that we have to recognize that poor sanitation results in poor health, and poor health doesn't recognize barriers. A child who is sick from poor sanitation goes to school with people who have good sanitation. And you know, the days of us having to fight things like cholera and so on need to be put permanently behind us. And I therefore laud your ministry's commitment to making sure that water and sanitation is available for all. I think that too often we adopt a classist approach to these things, not remembering that most of us are only one generation from standpipes and pit toilets. And that is a tragedy, really, in modern Barbados. And I think that it would benefit the country as a whole if the Water Authority made it a point of engaging Barbadians specifically on this issue and explaining to them what is at stake, but making the point that it is not your purpose, intention, or anything of the sort to vest a tenant or to vest a squatter with any rights. You're simply making sure that the rest of Barbados is not subjected to health risks. Thank you for the initiative. It takes a lot of bravery to be able to do it. But I think that at all times we have to remember that we're in government to do the right thing. And I appreciate your candidness and invite you only to talk Barbadians through the issue.
Honourable Member, I thank you for those exceedingly kind compliments and comments. And it is, now that we've put it out there...
There's no water in some districts in St. Joseph today, so my kind comments will be short-lived.
It is our intention to talk Barbadians through every aspect of our processes. The public who's been paying attention, actually even if you haven't been paying attention, you would notice that the public message from the Barbados Water Authority and the information is a lot more frequent than it was before. We've taken a position to talk Barbados through the good and the bad. If we're having issues, then we're going to let you know, because people need to be able to plan their business. With respect to the last comment by the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, I take fully on board what he has said, and now that we've put this one out in the open, as I said, while we implemented the policy, we hadn't gone fully into the public with it for sensitive reasons. But now it's out there. We will push to advise people and allay fears of those who think that we're creating a revolution. And we will address it as fully as we can in keeping with our current policy to deal straight and plain and fully with the public of Barbados.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question is not going to be a long one. I first, though, would want to, on behalf of the people of St. Peter, especially on the eastern side, Boscobel, what I call the greater Boscobel area, to thank the Barbados Water Authority for the installation of the tank, and we note its imminent commissioning. We also are very happy about the relationship that we have with the Barbados Water Authority, where, while recognizing that my people don't always have water and don't always have clear water, once we've set up a system where they feed into us, but I shouldn't use the word feeding, that sounds like a tariff, where they notify us and we contact the Barbados Water Authority, and we've been having good response. So I really want to thank the board, the chair and management for the relationship that we've been able to build up. And that has really gone a long way in, it doesn't stop a person from being upset when there's no water, but it really helps to know that the organization that is tasked with providing that necessary item is working with us and assisting in mitigating the challenges. I also want to thank, I also thank Barbados Water Authority as well for working with us with the 6 men's, the connections. We've had, like everything else, it hasn't been as smooth as maybe it should have been, but I just want to keep stressing the relationship building that helps us to work through the challenges that will arise from time to time. Now, what I wanted to find out, there's been, but 2 things. I think they're not probably long questions. One is the matter of discolored water. I know the issue with the mains being old, and I'm just wondering what is the plan, because bearing in mind that it cannot be a short-term fix or an immediate fix, I think we should share with the public what the plan is for moving us past the periodic brown water. I know sometimes we flush the mains and that kind of thing. What is the plan for moving us past the periodic brown water? And then the second question I have has to do with what is going to be one of the industries of the future, the oil and gas, in terms of exploration. And this is more from a Ministry of Labour perspective, just to find out from your ministry, Minister, what role is your ministry going to play as it relates to building up the skills of Barbadians to take advantage? I know this is multi-ministry, it is cross-cutting, it is education, my ministry is involved, but your ministry would also be involved. So I just want to find out from you, well, really for the public's benefit, what role is your ministry going to play in ensuring that our workers, well, we get to the point where our workers can benefit from the jobs that I'm sure will come as we build out that, that industry in oil and gas?
Okay, thank you, Minister, for your questions. In regard to the issue of discolored water, as was indicated before, the network, Barbados, the water distribution network within Barbados is aged. We have 3-inch, 5-inch, all of those odd-sized pipes. Those pipes are no longer made. They're, in many instances, 30, 40, 50 years old. When those pipes were made, they did not have a protective lining on the inside. New pipes that are being made now have what they call a cement lining on the inside, so the water doesn't come into contact with the material of the pipe at all. Those older pipes are online. So what happens when we add water where the salinity has increased, is happening along the coast, as Dr. Mwansa pointed out yesterday, or we add water from a desalination plant, as we have in the north of the island. What happens is that you then have some of that rust being removed from the pipe and going into and traveling along with the water. What we have been doing is flushing as a more immediate solution, but what we have been doing is researching, and we've been looking at different ways to basically ameliorate that problem. Because the ultimate solution would be to change the pipelines, but changing all of those pipelines, as we indicated, is very expensive. So recently, what we have been doing is doing some research, and we've been finding short-term solutions where we could add what we call a sequestering agent to the water, and it would prevent that rust from going into the water itself. And over the next couple of weeks to months, we'll be doing that at a number of locations, our pumping locations across the island. We're going to be starting in the north and coming right down, because the instances of discolored water in the north are more prevalent than some of the other areas. So we're going to be working with your communities across the north of the island and trying to eliminate or try to reduce that brown water problem as much as possible.
Mr. White, can you please answer about the skill development?
Honorable member, thank you for your question. I think it's a very timely and important question. And what I can say is that as part of the commitments made by BHP in relation to the offshore, the company has also been mandated to put forward money towards development of local capacity for government and other stakeholders, including the National Oil Company. As part of their license commitments, they've committed $2 million for the first year of the license, and then they will also contribute additional funds on an annual basis under each license year. These commitments will cover critical aspects, including training, including coastal and environment research, in order to acquire software and hardware. They've made commitments to the University of the West Indies to develop appropriate oil and gas training programs. And they've also committed money towards providing scholarships for Barbadian nationals. What we've done is that we're going to make these opportunities available across the entire government sector. We have a number of committees that work in relation to the offshore. So we have our offshore committee, we have our environmental impact committee, we have our pre-qualification committees, and the opportunities will be extended to all of these members. So what we've done, we've invited all the members of the various committees to a meeting this week, where we will discuss the opportunities and protocols and priorities for training in moving forward in relation to the offshore. We recognize that at this phase, where they're doing exploration, critical areas of training will include environmental matters, HSSE, technical, of course, the geological aspect, economics, as well as petroleum law, in terms of negotiating contracts and ensuring that we're on top of those aspects. So with the monies that the company has provided, we expect to provide a broad range of training for all of our various stakeholders. We'll be creating a training plan in collaboration with all the members of the committee, so that we cover all of the key areas that are important to Barbados, particularly in the area of coastal environment research. We know very little about our marine environment. Particularly, most of our knowledge is very close to the shore. As we extend into the deep waters, we have the potential to learn a lot more about potential resources, potential opportunities for fisheries, expanding fisheries, and better understanding our marine environment in terms of the flow of currents and how that impact our coastal environment. So we're very excited about the opportunity to have these funds available to train our local professionals and stakeholders, build capacity at the university level, build capacity also on a business level. So I'll let my colleague also expand into the aspect of local content, where we've sought to establish a local content policy where we not only build capacity in terms of the professional, technical, and vocational skills, but also bring our local business enterprises up to scratch so that they can compete for potential contracts put out by the oil and gas companies that we do business with. So I'll let my colleague also jump in and expand on that.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for the question. The local content program offers a significant means by which we can now seek to diversify beyond the oil and gas, where we can have persons be engaged in terms of enterprise development and building the capacity of Barbados, not only to supply Barbados and the companies that come to the Barbados shore, but also to be able to export those services, because you would well know that this industry, oil and gas is a finite resource. And 40 years from now, 100 years from now, we should be able to still export services, not only to oil and gas industries offshore in other countries, but also to related renewable energy sector, such as the offshore wind, because they are fairly close in terms of their technologies, in terms of floating wind turbines and so on. So the program, as my colleague mentioned, speaks about developing our human resources. We want the targets in the program is to have at least 50%, a minimum of 50% of locals involved, local part of the human resources involved in the offshore or involved in the oil and gas sector and supporting that sector from a human resource standpoint. From the enterprise development, we want to be able to have a minimum of 10 to 15% of the goods and services in the first instance coming from Barbados. But that would mean that we will have to develop our capacity to meet the standards of these international oil companies. Additionally, we have to evaluate our regulatory framework. That is the final component, or the third component of the program, where we evaluate our regulatory framework to ensure that we can provide the services in a way, and the goods in a way that would meet the standards and to be able to be competitive.
Thank you, sir. Could you please introduce yourself for our records?
I'm sorry, I'm Brian Haynes. I'm the acting chief project analyst in the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources.
Okay, thank you.
And just to wrap this part up, Norway, the Norwegian model is the model that we are most closely following, because Norway has hydrocarbon reserves offshore, but Norway has concentrated on the consumption of renewable energy onshore. And so Norway and the UK have both used the experiences and the skills developed in the offshore sector for their renewable energy sectors, the technical skills, the technology, the support services. So there is a synergistic opportunity to be gained there. So although we're developing them directly in relation or because of the developments in our offshore hydrocarbon space, a lot of the skill sets developed can be used back inland or domestically in the development of our renewable energy capacity.
Thank you very much, Minister and team. Thank you.
Chairperson, I beg to move the suspension of. Okay, yeah. Chairperson, I beg leave for you to report progress to His Honor the Speaker and to ask for leave to sit again.
Question is that I do not report to the Honorable Speaker progress, and I ask to leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All honorable members against, please say nay. He thinks the ayes have it.
How much more time do we have?
The chairman of the committee has reported progress and asks to leave to sit again.
Your Honor, Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this sitting of the House be suspended for lunch until 2:30 this afternoon.
Okay. Somebody second it, please. The question is that this House be suspended for lunch until 2:30 this afternoon. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This House is now suspended until 2:30 today.